We're talking with David Eagles, the Director of the Center for Presidential Transition at the Partnership for Public Service. David, when was the Center for Presidential Transition created, and what are you doing right now with the two campaign teams?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So we launched the Center for Presidential Transition in January. We really started this effort at the Partnership for Public Service 8 years ago, recognizing how important transitions were. I mean, we really think they've always been big, complex, and a period of vulnerability, but when managed strategically, we think it's one of the greatest opportunities to make government more effective. So launched the center in January, began the work with the incoming teams in April. Been working with the outgoing administration since about that point as well, and all the federal agencies as they get prepared. And since then, we've been connecting them with the right resources and experts, connecting all the dots, making sure we can have the smoothest transition ever.
And let's talk about how big this transition is. Talk about the numbers.
The sheer size of it is amazing, right? So you're talking 4,000 political appointments, over a $4 trillion budget, hundreds of federal agencies. I mentioned the 4,000 appointments. 1,100 of those have to go through the Senate, which is no easy process. And so this is the work that these teams are focused on right now. They're building and staffing up, and at the end of the day, we should see much better results than we've ever seen.
Mm-hmm. And compare this with the leadership transition in the business world.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of similarities, right? So it's interesting. All 4,000 employees quit the exact same day here on 12:01 p.m. January 20th, right? So you have an entire leadership apparatus that leaves. Also, there's been very little due diligence through the process. Again, you could buy a small business. It would take you 6 to 12 months of due diligence and CEO succession plans. You'd have consultants. You'd have armies of consultants lining up to help you with an M&A deal in the private sector. And there's virtually nothing for the largest, most complex entity and powerful entity in the world, right? There's just nothing. And so this is what we really tried to fill the void on. We've got a transition platform which has all the files, and we've got the right advisory board to help these incoming teams not start from scratch, which is what every team has done, but start off from what we've learned in the past.
And what are the top 3 or 4 most important tasks for a new administration?
So a couple things they'll be focused on now. One is their presidential appointments. So both teams have appointments teams that are focused on just what these roles are and beginning to source talent against those roles. They'll put together slates of options for the candidate president-elect right after the election to make quick decisions. So that's appointments. They're focused on their campaign promises. They're cataloging what those promises are. They're going through an agency review process, so they're going through all the federal agencies just to understand what it is they do, and then beginning to connect the dots between their campaign promises, ultimately to develop a 100 or 200-day execution plan. And then they have other components in transition as well. There's a congressional strategy, which is both getting your people through the Senate confirmation process and executing on some mandates through Congress to get your priorities done. And they'll also be focused on just taking care of the president-elect and first lady or first family or the vice president. There's a whole process there during that 73-day period of time that they've got to be focused on.
All right, last question. Is there a contingency plan for a scenario like 2000?
You know, it's also a good question. I'll say now, because the teams are focused on this earlier, what we've seen is they have been making some contingency plans. Now, I don't know in this case, but I can tell you 4 years ago, we actually developed scenarios based on when a winner could be announced. And so if you had a shortened formal transition period, how would you respond to that? My guess is, and our advice to the teams would be to think about that, consider a compressed schedule if you had to have one. That's one of the great benefits of having this pre-election transition planning process now. We should have coverage for those types of issues and all the other vulnerability type issues that exist during election and transition.
Great, thank you so much.
Of course, thank you. Thanks for having me.